Questions?
In one of your recent videos,
Mm-hmm.
like two videos ago, as well as on a post on X,
Just let's
you
do a little bit of sound check. Go ahead, a little bit louder. Keep speaking.
uh,
There you go. Good.
can you hear me?
Yeah, that's good.
Good. In one of your recent videos and in a post on X, you discussed the center of the body called the Hara,
Uh huh.
and um, and you discussed centering on that part of the body and moving from it. So I'd like to read the X post and then ask a question.
Okay. Good.
Uh, so here's what you posted the other day on X. In Zen, the center of the body is referred to as the Hara, Hara. It is the physical and energetic center of the body. Located about 2 inches below the navel, it is also the spiritual center. Centering on the Hara is used to develop personal power. And then you also discussed about moving from the Hara, like moving your body from the Hara and
All right.
centering on it. My first question is, what do you mean when you say center on the Hara, as opposed to in your mind or in your some other part of the body?
Uh, for example, and I think the example came up recently. Were you asking me about centering, finding a point of reference in the secret of the golden flower?
Somebody just asked about that.
Right.
Yeah.
So Buddhism and Taoism, and also a bit of Confucianism, uh, are all kind of mixed in in modern Buddhism, uh, whether we know it or not. I mean, this has just been the history of those traditions in the East. And in the Secret of the Golden Flower, they talk about finding a point of reference before you begin your meditation practice. So if you're you're sitting down, you just want to start meditating, and you're going to focus on your breath, but you're all unsettled. So in Zen, they would teach us to focus right there on the Hara. You know, we'd be sitting in a very formal, half lotus or lotus position, or kneeling, and all of that's kind of unnecessary. Uh, there's a lot of things in Zen that are unnecessary, and let me speak about that a little bit before we get back to the Hara. There seems to be a misunderstanding that Zen and Buddhism is a monastic practice, because those are the ones they show in the movies, I guess, or those are the ones that were popular in the 60s, that you would go off and just not do anything else but meditation. That's a very big mistake. People who just do that can get obsessed, can get fixated. Having said that, there are some people that sometimes who should do something like that because that's part of their overall development. But in general, to begin any of these practices, you have to have a job. You have to have a place in the world. You can't be worried about a roof over your head or food on the table, and be worried about the golden flower practice, for example. So that's a prerequisite to any of this work. You got to take care of the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, security and the basic necessities of life. So, but in Zen, they got the idea that you should do this isolated from the world, and you didn't need a job. And those days are gone. Those were days when there was too many men, not enough food. Maybe you're up in maybe not in the mountains for Zen, but in Tibet, you're up in the mountains. It's the winter. And it's a different set of circumstances than in the contemporary West. So what I'm trying to do is alert people to if they do happen to have that idea that in order to practice these things seriously, which is what you have to do, you need to quit your job and put on the robes. That's a big mistake, and sometimes kids do that. Now, going back to the Hara is just the Japanese word for that center underneath there. And I think most martial artists, I don't know, I haven't checked in decades, but back in the day, that's where they'd want you to move from, right? It's because I think it's the gravitate. If you took the body and you rested it sideways on a fulcrum, the center would be right there where the Hara is. I think that's an equal distribution of weight or something like that. But in any case, it's what's remarkable is how many different traditions end up focusing right there. And I'm sure it probably corresponds to some chakra or another, but that's not important now. And so in the Secret of the Golden Flower practice, and in many meditation practices, you need to find a place to center. Now, for some people, it's the sensation of air as it's moving against the nostrils. They focus the attention on that. It's very nice. For other people, it's the diaphragm moving up and down. And for other people, it's the hara down here in the belly. It doesn't really matter where you center yourself. From there, you're going to go on to the let's say the golden flower practice of turning the light around, which is just basic meditation, really. And people should know that golden flower means light. So we're talking about the secret of light. And they just use the metaphor of golden flower because when your mind opens, it's like the blossoming of a golden flower, blossoming of light. So with regard to the hara, that's what I'd have to say. And I think I misspoke in another one. I spoke about focusing on the diaphragm, and I conflated it with the hara, and I wanted to correct that too. All right. Does that answer the question more or less?
Yeah, but I have a couple follow-ups.
Good.
The first is, so you said you could center on any part of the body or any of these sensations. Is the hara unique in some way?
Yeah. But that's later. The reason I wanted to point it out was because I wanted to point out that the in the Toltec luminous egg, that's where all of the fibers go in.
Right.
Which I just thought that was a very interesting. I don't think it's a coincidence.
I have a different question.
Different question.
Since you brought up the Toltec seers, I have a number of questions about this second book in Carlos Castañeda's series with Don Juan called Journey to Ixtlan.
Okay, yeah, let's see. This is probably the best in the Castañeda series for a practical introduction, Journey to Ixtlan, because it includes many descriptions of the mood of a warrior, the way a warrior approaches life, the way a warrior approaches higher learning. And it's good. It's just good coaching advice, actually. I think most of it, anyway. And it's more modern. It's more modern, and it's Western, right? And it's an indigenous practice to the Americas, which is also kind of nice. You know that East Coast West Coast thing they have in rap. That East Coast West Coast thing they have in rap. They used to have between New York and L.A.
Yeah.
That's kind of like that. We got to represent. I'm joking. Okay, go ahead.
I do like that there's a different aspects to the tradition that are unlike what a lot of people expect. Everybody goes to Zen or everybody goes to a lot of the Eastern traditions, and I didn't even know about this one before I started.
Right. Well, I thought it was just a clown show, but then I had a very serious teacher point out to me that I was judging a book by its cover.
I had the same judgment initially.
Yeah, but so it's not true. Actually, it's a very beautiful and very valuable. But you have to approach it very seriously. You can't just read it as a popular bestseller. You have to understand what's actually happening, and that's not clear. I mean, you have to go through 3 books before you get to any kind of real meat. Well, that's not entirely true, but
It also doesn't help that Carlos is the conveyor of the message.
Well, if it hadn't been for him, though, these books would not be distributed all over the world.
That's true. That's true. I just meant for clarity's purpose, at least in the beginning. So my first question is from the introduction, and it's about a topic that's brought up multiple times by Don Juan. So this page 11 of the introduction, XI.
All right, go ahead.
My question is about this passage. Carlos is talking about a friend of his who had a kid who was very rambunctious, acting out all the time.
Yeah.
And Don Juan gives him this advice. Carlos is asking, how would this kid, how do you raise this kid properly so he's not acting out? And Don Juan gives him this, to a modern Western mind, a pretty far-fetched seeming idea where the dad of the kid should hire basically a homeless person who...
Not a homeless person, a really scary bum.
Yeah, a very scary person off the street who, I don't know, had tons of tattoos or piercings, particularly foreboding or scary to a kid.
They didn't have tattoos back then, unless they were ex-sailors. But okay, keep going. I got it.
Okay, but you get the picture.
Yeah. Just a really scrungy derelict, right?
Yeah, to spank the kid. He should hire him to jump out of a corner and then spank the kid, scare him.
Absolutely.
And so Don Juan says, quote, "If I were your friend," Don Juan said, "I would start by hiring someone to spank the little guy. I would go to Skid Row and hire the worst looking man I could find. To scare a little boy? Not just to scare a little boy, you fool. That little fellow must be stopped."
That's
in
right.
Italics.
Absolutely.
And being beaten by his father won't do it. If one wants to stop our fellow men, one must always be outside the circle that presses them. That way one can always direct the pressure. And then there are other instances of...
Well, finish the story. People may not know the story. It's a good story about, and it beats, medication. This is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but a little bit not. So finish the story.
Okay.
So we have a kid who's out of control, right? He's completely out of control. The father comes to a friend of Don Juan's and asks what he should do. And he says, whatever you do, you shouldn't confront him directly. In this case.
Yeah.
What you should do is you should go to Skid Row, find the worst looking derelict you could find, and arrange for that guy to jump out of the what does he say? Just read it.
Yeah, I'll continue. So, to jump out of a corner and then spank the kid. Carlos thinks his idea is, quote, preposterous. And he says, "Tell me more about what my friend should do with his little boy," I said. Don Juan says, "Tell him to go to Skid Row and very carefully select an ugly-looking derelict," he went on. "Tell him to get a young one who still has some strength left in him." Don Juan then delineated a strange strategy. I was to instruct my friend to have the man follow him or wait for him at a place where he would go with his son. The man, in response to a prearranged cue to be given after any objectionable behavior on the part of the child, was supposed to leap from a hiding place, pick the child up, and spank the living daylights out of him.
Yeah. And
then this is near the end. After the man scares him, your friend must help the little boy regain his confidence in any way he can.
The father should help him regain his confidence. Okay, good.
Exactly. If he follows this procedure 3 or 4 times, I assure you that the child will feel...
Did you leave part of it out?
No, this is directly from there.
He doesn't take him.
What do you think is missing?
He doesn't take him to a morgue and show him a dead child, and he has to touch the dead.
That's another thing that he says. Is that it's to show him a dead child? I forget if that's before
take him to a morgue,
after.
Right? Let him see a dead kid, right? And then have him touch the body with his left hand, and that will change his trajectory.
That's another part of it. Another thing that he could do.
Yeah. So,
my first question is, Don Juan describes as about the stopping part. What does he mean by, because he talks about this otherwise, he can stop Carlos at points just by staring at him. what is stopping somebody? Like, what is
Well,
this
wait a
in this
minute.
case?
Are we talking about stopping Carlos, a grown man, or stopping a little kid?
Okay,
Those are two different
let's
things.
yeah. All right, then let's just stick to this example that I read through. What does he mean that the kid must be stopped, and if he has to stop him,
It's just like
you
when you
should be
bring
out?
a kid to a child psychiatrist and say, "I don't know what to do, doctor. He's been thrown out of school. He punched somebody. He bit a girl. He's out of control." And he's saying he's got to stop him while he's young, while he's developmentally, young.
Mhm.
And back then,
So
you didn't have TV ads for pharmaceuticals, and you didn't just go and start pumping amphetamine to the kid, right? You just showed him what life. I mean, you showed him aspects of life that he might not otherwise see. It's the story, and you got to remember, Don Juan is trying to teach here something, and it's something very important. That the greatest teacher is the world, the real world. There's no question about that one. So you must be exposed to the world, and increasingly people are sequestering themselves away from the actual world reality, which is their greatest teacher besides death, right? Death over here, and yeah, do them good to get outside, you know, you know, and see the world a little bit more, and see that it's not as it appears in the mind of a child necessarily. And if you have a strong-willed child and a child that's out of control, I'm not giving child psychiatric advice at all. Nothing close to that. What I'm doing is simply pointing out that there's more than one way to. I was going to say skin a cat, but I don't like that image. But you know what I'm saying. And by the way, while we're there, somebody commented, and I appreciated it on my to one of the videos, and they wanted a plug for their. They're doing some little, it looks like AI done visualizations of some of these stories in Don Juan, and that one's on there. So it's a shout out to that. His last name is Castañeda. Let me see if I can remember his first name. And then I saw his avatar, and I couldn't tell whether is this the grandson of Castañeda or something, or who is this kid? I don't know. I don't know much about him, but some enterprising young man is making little movie vignettes with AI. It sounds like, or looks like. I don't know. Maybe it's not AI. So that's there, in case people want to see a dramatization of it. Okay. So
then,
what's the question then about this? The stopping the kid.
well, the two parts. One is this: if one wants to stop our fellow men,
Mm-hmm.
and this seems more generalized than just the kid,
Okay.
but you tell me if I'm wrong. Don Juan says, if one wants to stop our fellow men, one must always be outside the circle that presses them. That way one can always direct the pressure. Can you explain that a little bit?
And one also has many more degrees of freedom. There was a tweet that I thought was pretty astute that comes to mind, and if I don't get it out, I'm not going to be able to, because I want to use it for answering this question. But basically, it notes that someone who's outside of the status hierarchy in whatever field it may be, that they have much more freedom to learn, to ask questions, to look at the whole thing, and then to look at things from a totally different angle. And so being part of a status hierarchy, which is so much of so many professions, so many educational institutions, so many governmental institutions, the military, all kinds of other things, there's a status hierarchy. If you can, you want to be free of all that, because then you're just much freer to move around in the world, and because your identity is not tied to that status. And I think in this book, I think I just saw a chapter called losing self-importance, right? So losing self-importance is really, really vital in many ways, and this is just one of them I thought I'd mention. Now, with regard to being outside the circle, so you can apply pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, you just have a lot more freedom, to do that. I mean, I need a concrete example, but okay, I could use the CIA, right? So the CIA, let's say the C. Oh no, I better not say that. Ooh, the AIs are listening to all of this. Uh, let's say you're in the auto workers union hierarchy, right? And there's someone there who's just really messing up their own life, messing up everybody else. You know, they're doing something that's just totally counterproductive and not, you know. If you're in that same silo, it's harder for you to intervene in any way that's going to make a difference because he's already going to have an answer laid out, or he's already going to have a rationalization in his head. But if you were to come from the outside and exert pressure from there, there's many more things you could do. I don't want to get too detailed because this is pretty Machiavellian stuff in a way, right? Read Machiavelli, I guess would be the way to put it. You know, I'm not a big endorser of that in modern times. But you just have to do it on your own. You see what I'm saying? Because if I were to reveal strategies like that, now I'm thinking about rappers. You know, the rappers have a big status hierarchy, right? And the way they exert pressure is within the circle of influence. You know, they banish somebody. Somebody gets canceled, and they won't publish his music. They won't let him, you know, perform. They won't sell his tickets. Well, that's not going to change that person. That's just going to make that person more entrenched in their way of doing things. But if they were just a bit more creative and didn't go through all the usual channels, they could do all kinds of things. I don't want to get too particular here because that's juice you don't want to just spill all over the place.
Okay, but
and by the way, I'm not recommending beating kids. I'm not recommending recruiting derelicts from Skid Row to beat your kids so you don't have to. And I'm not recommending, although I don't know, I might recommend that kids go see a dead kid in a morgue. I think that's salutary. Under the right circumstances, and this is not practicing medicine or anything like that, okay? But sometimes what we do is we just shove meds down the kid and break his spirit, right? And tell him he's defective, you're defective. And we're going to medicate your defectiveness. And that's a terrible message to a kid. Now, there are times that medications are indicated, there's no question. But I'm not practicing medicine, so let's leave that for now. But I hope you can catch the drift. More or less. Yeah,
I do. And that leads into another question I have. That's a separate
question.
So, in Journey to Ixtlan, there's the chapter Erasing Personal History.
Okay.
Which is something Don Juan tells Carlos is a thing he needs to do. And there we go. Carlos asks Don Juan how to erase his personal history. Personal history is a lot of all these stories that Carlos or an individual tells themselves about their past, and they hold on to things. My parents treated me this way. My neighbors treated whatever, all this stuff.
A lot of it's victim mentality.
And on page 11, Carlos asks Don Juan, how can one drop one's personal history? I asked in an argumentative mood. And Don Juan says, one must first have the desire to drop it, and then one must proceed harmoniously to chop it off little by little.
In the Buddhist parlance, this is called leaving home. One must leave home on the journey to truth. Okay, so what's the question?
So, a couple questions. One, is that like Buddhist detachment, leaving home, or no?
It's one of the detachments in that, but it's somewhat figurative, unless you're truly going into a Tibetan monastery, you know, or something like that. But otherwise, it's just like you can't be preoccupied with, you know, your childhood. You can't be preoccupied about who did what to whom. You're going to bore your teacher to death, for one thing, because everybody's got these stories. This is what people don't realize. They come and they want to tell you a story, But their story is literally identical to the same story everybody else tells. It's just the details are different. And you get nowhere with that. It's just more ego. Just more ego. And so when you erase personal history, you also erase, oh boy, guilt, in the sense that guilt is just a self-indulgence. You need to improve, you need to apologize, you need to change something, but just wallowing in guilt, that doesn't serve any purpose. For example, or shame, or not the way we used to say it was, not even God can change the past. And so people who spend their whole adult life trying to change their childhood, it goes nowhere ultimately. And they just substitute one trauma or unfortunate circumstance, which seemed unfortunate, but actually could develop their character, for another. And that you can do this your whole life, and many people do. And what they don't understand is it's just more ego reinforcing itself, more ego enforcing itself. And so in many traditions, they say just drop that and let's focus on the present, right? On the present has got us plenty for us here, right now. There's plenty. We don't need to ruminate about the past.
So that much makes sense to me, but Don Juan continues, and this part is a little harder for me to understand or apply in modern day, which is on page 14. Don Juan says, "Little by little, you must create a fog around yourself. You must erase everything around you until nothing can be taken for granted, until nothing is any longer for sure or real. Your problem now is that you're too real. Your endeavors are too real. Your moods are too real. Don't take things for granted. You must begin to erase yourself."
Yeah. Well, there's like 3 or 4 different things in there, right? One is losing self-importance. Go through them one by one, because you went through about 4 different points, teaching points.
Okay. Little by little, you must create a fog around yourself.
Create a fog, okay? So it's more like recognize there's a fog around you. So you have your own self-identity, right? You have a picture of yourself in your mind. And what people do is they fantasize that other people have something resembling that same picture of them in their minds. But they don't. They have a totally different picture. They don't know your interior life. And you can use all the words you want. They're still not going to understand what it's like to be you.
Yeah.
So part of it is growing up and recognizing that fact. And there's a lot of pressure in the contemporary world in non-Dharma students to just keep reinforcing that. That's a lot of what psychotherapy is a lot of another kind of psychotherapy is just keeping to reinforce those elements of ego that depend on the opinions or viewpoints of others. So just get rid of that and create a mitote, a fog around yourself, because otherwise everything you do, you're thinking about, wow, I wonder what my parents would think of this, or oh yeah, man, my girlfriend would really love me more if she knew I was doing this, or wow, I'm going to show that teacher from 3rd grade that I know my stuff, or whatever. It's just like noise, right?
Okay. Continuing, you must erase everything around you until nothing can be taken for granted, until nothing is any longer for sure or real.
Well, those are 3 different things. So let's take them each one. Nothing taken for granted.
You must erase everything around you until nothing can be taken for granted.
Okay, well, first of all, not taking anything for granted is its own teaching right there.
Yeah.
The fact that we're alive, the fact that we can see, the fact that we're in a world, the fact that there is a world. If you take that for granted, how can you understand? So you must begin to grow up and wake up and say, hey, wait a minute, why am I here? What is this about? What is my purpose? And so you can't do that and take everything for granted, or anything for granted for that matter. It's because to do that shows that you don't understand how this world works, for one thing. All right, so that's taking things for granted. That's one. What's the next one?
Until nothing is any longer for sure or
Oh,
real.
well, for sure and real are two different nuance, right?
Okay. Until nothing is any longer for sure.
Well, that's another adult recognition. I mean, you realize, okay, well, I've got a nice house and a nice car, and a wife and two kids, and the Talking Heads song, "This is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful." What do you know that song?
I remember what
Dun,
you're talking
dun,
about, but I
dun.
don't remember.
I can't do it. Yeah, because if you've lived life enough, you'll realize all that can get taken away. That's one reason. Whatever you have can be taken away, and it is taken away. So most people go through periods of being poor in their life, and maybe they go through periods of being wealthy in their life, or maybe they go through periods of having a beautiful family, but then it's gone, or they have they're totally in solitude, and then they have a beautiful family. So just don't take things for granted, and don't make assumptions. This would be related to Don Ruiz's "Don't make assumptions." Don't assume that because it's here, it'll always be here. And anybody who's
Mm-hmm.
lost someone to death knows this. And so they're just trying to accelerate his learning. All right. Next one is real.
Or real.
So read the sentence and just talk about the real.
You must erase everything around you until nothing can be taken for granted, until nothing is any longer for sure or real.
Yeah. Well, or real, that's just a basic Buddhist teaching.
Right.
Everything is
Right.
interdependent. There's nothing that you can name. There's nothing in the world that you can name, in this world that you can name, that exists inherently. Everything is made up of other parts. So in that sense, we can call this a pencil, but we could also say, actually, it's a piece of wood with an eraser and some metal on it here and some graphite. And maybe it's a pencil now, but in not too long, it'll be like this, and then the eraser will fall off, and then we just have this little piece of metal. Is that a pencil? No. Is an eraser a pencil? No. Is a piece of wood in this shape a pencil? No, but it's shaped like a pencil. But the graphite's all gone. So is it a pencil, or was it a pencil? I didn't do a good job of explaining it, but let me just ask anyone out there. Let me give them this challenge. Find something in the world that's not made of something else. And that's one little facet of emptiness from the Buddhist way of disassembling this notion of reality. The Buddhists teach that this is Maya, it's an illusion. Another way to do it is just go to Don Hoffman, right? He'll say that what we're looking at is not real. It's just like a little icon on the screen. And so it's real, but it's not real, both at the same time. And that's the part where thinking just gets in the way. That's a big, huge topic. You're talking about emptiness, really. So, but that's a little foretaste of what's likely to be coming. Okay?
Okay. Don Juan continues. He says about erasing your personal history.
The whole
How?
world's a dream. The whole world's a dream. So, are dreams real? Well, they're real dreams, but are they real? In a sense, they're not. Okay, but in another sense, they are. They're real dream objects. Just like this is a real dream body. Go ahead.
Carlos asks how to erase his personal history, and Don Juan says, begin with simple things, such as not revealing what you really do. Then you must leave everyone who knows you well. This way you'll build up a fog around yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Carlos says, that's absurd, I protested. Why shouldn't people know me? What's wrong with that? Don Juan says, what's wrong is that once they know you, you are in a affair taken for granted, and from that moment on, you won't be able to break the tie of their thoughts.
Yeah.
I personally like the ultimate freedom of being unknown. No one knows me with steadfast certainty, the way people know you, for instance. So, these suggestions or these teachings seem to be quite a bit radical for the modern person living in their day-to-day life with 10 or 15 business and personal ties that are the things people they run into every single day and the relationships they have every day. Is this practically, what do you take from this?
What does whom take from it? Let's say you're training for special forces. Okay?
Yeah.
And there's a squad of, let's say, 7 men and women. Or let's say half of them are men, half of them are women. But they're in training, they're in boot camp. What if they all sat down around the campfire and started telling stories about their childhood and their friends and all the parties they went to and what their teachers thought of them, and the fact that when their parent was totally insensitive and forgot to pick them up at school and all, what does that have to do with being in special forces, right? So sometimes you just put those things to the side.
People would say camaraderie.
They're not going to talk about, that's not what camaraderie is built of. I can promise you, it's not built of your childhood stories. It's built out of being in the shit together, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a different thing, and it has nothing to do with your past. It has to do with the present and how you're going to represent and protect your fellows and be there reliably for them. And you form new friendships and you form new ties, and it has nothing to do with being back in Peoria. You basically they call people by the name of a town or a state, right?
So
or a race. I shouldn't have said special forces. I should have said Marines, right? Uh-huh. It's a different endeavor. It's not like that. It's not a social club. The search for truth. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of those things, but he's talking to Don Juan. They're in a desert in northern Mexico. Don Juan has, been very fortunate, and they're gonna work with this kid and try and wake him up. And they're saying, we don't want to hear about all your childhood stories. We don't want you to forget about your girlfriend for a bit, your second girlfriend that broke up with you, and now you're heartbroken or whatever, and you can't get over it. You just forget about it. It's not germane.
I have a question about that too, but that's for later.
Okay.
So this part right here, begin with simple things, such as not revealing what you really do. Let's take that one and then move to the others. People,
they get their name in the newspaper, or they publish a paper, or they get a employee of the month, and they go around and they tell everybody, and this is like this is. Do you see what I'm saying? It's just like. Yeah. What business is it of anybody's, right? So people use their accomplishment or the lack thereof as a way to stoke their own egos, right?
Yeah, I see that often.
And that's not something you do. We're trying to minimize the ego. Down to the minimal functional unit that you need to get by in the world. And you don't have to go spewing at everything that you do, and it's sloppy living. Have some pride. Have some self-respect, okay? Sometimes you do things because of the thing that needs to be done. It's like generosity. You ever go to church and these people that, the basket passes and you watch them reach into their back pocket and then they open their wallet, right? And they kind of everybody kind of sees, how, and then they take their money out and then they drop it in the basket, and everybody's, here they go. See what I'm saying? That's not generosity. That's not charity. That's like trying to get virtue points, and virtue points have of no value here, none whatsoever, because here we're interested in the reality, not in the appearance. There it is. Because now we're going to focus on reality, not on a model of reality, on reality and not appearance, and the opinions of others is of no account.
Okay, then the next that's clarifying. Thank you. The next part. Then you must leave everyone who knows you well. This way you'll build up a fog around yourself.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a bit further?
Well, what do they have to do with what you're doing?
So
This is going to take all
me
you've got. This is going to take all you've got. Okay. So what do they have to do with what you're doing? You want to get the Purple Heart. You want to get their approval. You want them to look up to you. You want them to think, oh, you're so pure and kind. Like some kind of Catholic monk or something. I mean, this is not for show. And if you're constantly, okay, oh, I meditated 20 minutes today. I'm going to go call my mom, right? Oh, man, she's going to love this.
I see. Okay.
Oh, wait till my sister finds out that I meditated a week in a row. I mean, come on, man. It's not like that. It's more like the Marines, frankly.
Mm-hmm. And
they shave your head, and they make everybody dress the same, and everybody acts the same, and everybody's the same, plebe. Everybody's treated identical. You barely have a different name, and if the name they've given you is probably insulting, right? So you gotta disassemble things before you can reassemble them into a warrior, right?
I see.
Okay, good.
That makes sense.
Is that one or next question?
No, that's good for that one. Next question. Now I have a question from later on. No, that actually, you answered that. This one's related, so that makes sense. I agree with that. Yeah, that makes sense. I have a question about... Okay, here we go. This is from Losing Self-Importance. I have a few questions from this chapter.
Okay.
The first one is regarding... It's a more...
Yeah, let's do it.
Across...
Question from Losing Self-Importance.
So Don Juan often will ask or instruct Carlos to do what seem to be certain peculiar things. One of them, at the beginning of this chapter, has to do with how Carlos is supposed to walk. It's a right way of walking. So they're walking for hours, Carlos and Don Juan.
They're walking for hours in a Mexican desert, in a scrub desert.
Exactly.
Okay.
Walking
yeah, he better know how to walk. Go ahead.
Carlos says, Don Juan taught me an appropriate form of walking, in quotes. He said that I had to curl my fingers gently as I walked, so I would keep my attention on the trail and the surroundings. He claims that my ordinary way of walking was debilitating, and that one should never carry anything in the hands.
Yeah.
If things had to be carried, one should use a knapsack or any sort of carrying net or shoulder bag. His idea was that by forcing the hands into a specific position, one was capable of greater stamina and greater awareness.
Yeah.
So...
Have you tried it?
I've not... So, I mean, insofar as not holding things and putting them into a bag, that makes total sense. I mean, why would you walk...
Until you try it, you can't say anything about it. But
Okay,
this is all common sense, right? This is all common sense. I mean, the guy. Remember, this guy's an egghead from UCLA. He's got his notebooks. He's got his pencils. He's probably got his pencil sharpeners and all his paraphernalia and all this other stuff. He's walking around like he's going from class to class. But now they're walking for hours and hours and hours. And sometimes they're running too.
All that makes sense to me. So, are you suggesting that that putting the hands into the specific curled position is like a way of getting Carlos to stop doing this asinine carrying around his stuff all the time in the desert? Because all of that makes sense to me, but it's like the peculiarity of...
Have you tried it?
No.
Try it and then ask the question. This is not theoretical stuff. This is not, I mean, within reason, but like with the meditations, to ask questions and not having even tried it, or to ask questions about books and not having read. Go ahead.
I did try it, but admittedly, I was walking in the streets of New York. I'm not walking for hours on a hike. I was just walking in the streets of New York
Find
City.
some place with mountain lions around, right? Find some place where you're a predator as well as a hunter, and try it. So remember, it's context too.
Interesting. Okay.
And so that's another important part of this Castañeda. And this is, whenever you read a book, you must think of the context in which the book is written. And so if a book is written in the context of a desert, a scrub desert with predators, rattlesnakes and mountain lions and things like that, and also where you're hunting for food. And so things look different when you put them in their context, and one must always strive to do that with Buddhist texts, with Tibetan texts, with, if something's written for a bunch of monks, you got to take that into account. If it's written for hunters, that's something very different. And so people must learn to read, and part of reading is to know, when was the book written, why was it written, who was it particularly addressed to, and for what purpose exactly, and in what environment. These are basics of reading. Okay. Mm-hmm. Next question.
Okay. Next question.
Question.
I have a question from the chapter in Journey to Ixtlan, being inaccessible.
Okay.
So Don Juan says to Carlos, let me find the quote.
While he's doing that, let me just give the public a caveat. Now, I feel, in a way, I feel like say, don't try this at home, but that's not entirely true. Be mature in how you apply any of these things, any of them, even meditation. You've got to be a grown-up adult, and you have to think, okay, what is my real situation? What do I have to deal with first? Because you do have to take care of business also. So don't just go off and say, oh, I'm just going to disconnect myself from my family. I'm going to disconnect myself from all my friends and all this other stuff. If you were to do something like that, you would do it in a manner that's appropriate, a manner that's grown up, not just as an excuse to avoid them or something like that. I'm sorry. Okay, Go ahead. Question.
Don Juan is talking to Carlos about this idea of being inaccessible. And he says to Carlos, you must learn to become deliberately available and unavailable, he said.
Yes.
As your life goes now, you are unwittingly available at all times. He continues, let me put it in another way. It makes no difference to hide if everyone knows that you're hiding. This is in response to Carlos being like, oh,
yeah,
I think
that's like the Mullah Nasruddin when he brings his friends home for dinner.
Yeah.
And and he comes, so he's at the bar, at the tea house, they're all drinking. He says, hey, come over to my house for dinner, right? And they say, okay, or whatever. So the mullah runs home, and his wife is like, what are you talking about? We don't have any food for them. We didn't have dinner or anything like that. And so he runs upstairs, and they're knocking at the door, and they want to know where mullah is. And she says something like, he's not here. And they say, well, wait a minute, we just saw him run in here and he invited us to dinner. And the mullah looks out from the top window and says, I could have run out the back way, right? Or something like that. And so, yeah. Okay, good. So that's an example of that.
Yeah,
Go
so
ahead.
Carlos basically tells Don Juan, I actually have this pretty secretive life, because I come down here and then I go back to my LA for my PhD or whatever. And so he's saying, Don Juan says, let me put it another way. It makes no difference to hide if everyone knows that you're hiding.
There you go.
Your problems your problems right now stem from that. When you're hiding, everyone knows that you're hiding. And when you are not, you are available for everyone to take a poke at you.
And to put a hook in you. Or for you to put a hook in them. And then you have all these lines going all over the place and you're not free. A warrior must be free above all. I mean, must be free. Especially psychically. Go ahead.
I was going to then add the blonde for this girlfriend Carlos had for context, but I guess could you...
The blonde that he had, what?
This blonde girlfriend Carlos, this is an example of Carlos being too available that Don Juan goes through.
Okay.
That I was going to add for color as an example, but maybe you can speak initially just about this. You must learn to become deliberately available and unavailable. You are unwittingly available at all times. What is this available and unavailable? This is like...
Okay, so first, so he goes down, he spends some time with these magnificent teachers. Then he goes back to LA and just puts it all over town, even writes a book, right? And publishes it.
Yeah.
And so now he's thinking about, my book, my friends, my PhD thesis. What are they going to think? I'm not doing anthropology the way I'm supposed to be doing it. He's all hooked in, right? So he doesn't have any free mind to work with, and so he needs some more freedom of his mind. And if all he's preoccupied with is the girls back in LA, or the publisher, or the thesis advisor, and God knows what else, then he doesn't have what he needs available. And it's mainly just ego. He's trying to impress the girl. He's trying to get his department to approve him, which I don't think they did. I think it was a big controversy at the time. They thought he was lying. And then, and also it was a totally unprofessional way to do anthropology. But, things happen. And so he was all hooked in. And what can you do? That's why when you go into the Marines, they don't let you call home for the first, 6 weeks at least, I think. Because you need to be there, focused on what you're doing. You can't be half of you there and the other half of you back home. Do you see?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Is that the nuance of your question, though? Is there something I'm missing there?
No, that makes sense. So
the Buddhists do the same thing, by the way. And the Taoists are even more extreme. You should read a book about Taoist preparation. Man, oh man, the hardcore Taoists, they hang you in a tree in a little wooden cage as a young kid and just let the wind blow you around, and you try and, deal with that for a while. Try and keep your balance.
That's not a metaphor.
No, that's not a metaphor. They literally do that in some schools of Taoism.
Okay.
But here they're cultivating masters, real masters of Taoism. There's a book that's written by a couple of surgeons who from China, and they were, I don't know, somehow or another related to a sect of Taoism that's still practiced, and they wrote a book about their teachers' training to preserve it for us, because we lose all this stuff.
Yeah, you've mentioned this one.
Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Do you know the name of it? Do you know the name of the book?
You never said to me.
The byline is The Making of a Taoist Wizard.
Something that, or maybe you did somewhere.
Okay.
Okay. Next question.
All right.
You want to hit the bell?
Oh yeah. Sorry. Woohoo. Thank you. Question.
I have a question from the chapter Death as an Advisor, also Journey to Ixtlan. On page 33.
Well, we need to get some practice questions too, because this is not a scholastic enterprise in the final analysis. These books are beautiful because they give us a context. They show us how other people at other times developed, young people or older people. But for us to mistake the cookbook for the cooking, would be a horrible mistake. So we can do some more of this, but just remember, this is not a scholastic enterprise. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Go.
Okay.
Death is an advisor.
Yeah.
What's the question?
This, my question is about, Carlos gets a chill after a white falcon flies overhead, and then Don Juan says, Carlos is asking what it all means, and Don Juan says, your death gave you a little warning, he said with a mysterious tone. It always comes as a chill. What is death giving you a warning, and what is this chill he's talking about?
I don't know. I'm not Carlos. I wasn't there. But death is our best advisor. Death is a supreme teacher. And in Buddhism, for the first year, in some places, the young Buddhist monks meditate in a cemetery. And you should spend some time in a cemetery, because death is the only... What are the certainties we have in life? Death. And the idea that we don't know when we're going to die. Those two things are the rules. So you need to contemplate the rules of this life, right? So death is an advisor. It's a supreme advisor.
So I have a practice
right
question
there over my
about
left shoulder. Go ahead.
I have a practice question for
okay. Go.
death.
Good.
So one of your recommendations is to go to a cemetery. Do you how else do? Or can you just sit and contemplate the idea of being dead? How do you actually
do both and more? How do you think Ramana Maharshi woke up? He was sitting there thinking, okay, someone had died. He realized he was going to die. He laid there, and you can go back and read it, but it's something focused on death, and that's what woke him up, right? Because we're not going to be here very long. This dream doesn't last that forever. It actually doesn't last a long time at all. You go like, it's gone. So death is there to help us not waste time, to focus our attention, to think, what is life for? What is it about? How can I live well? And death is a supreme teacher for this. It's what gives life meaning. Imagine life with no death. It wouldn't be human life at all. And then transcending death, which is a motivation for a lot of people, well, that gets taken care of. Because you can transcend death as well. But how? That's what people need to know. Or I would think they would be curious about, if you're philosophically inclined, or if you're inclined towards the deep questions, the good questions. So I think that's very straightforward. Next.
Okay.
Question.
I have a question about Krishnamurti's "The Observer is the Observed." I spent a while thinking about this one, and you have a post on X about 2 different ways to approach it.
I do? Okay.
Yeah. Or, well, not to approach it, but 2 different ways people arrive at this observer is the observed conclusion. So Krishnamurti, this is apparently a quote. It's from Krishnamurti Quotes that you reposted. Krishnamurti apparently said, "It is the greatest meditation to come upon this extraordinary thing, for the mind to discover for itself, the observer is the observed." You say, the observer is the observed. This discovery can be made by unbiased reasoning or through experience, and confirmed by either or both.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I spent a good amount of time contemplating this one, and the coming through it through unbiased reasoning, that makes 100% sense to me.
All right, just for everybody else. For everybody else, this is you. This is you. This is you with half your brain removed, the cortex. Mm-hmm. The world comes in through your eyes and through your ears. Now, the world that you see out there, where does that image exist? Well, even there's even put simply, it must exist in here if it's going to exist anywhere at all. So the observer has a representation of the world out there. Now it turns out that actually your mind is not confined to this thing at all, and your mind is this world, and that's the thing. I mean, that's just kind of a basic understanding that your mind, which you've imagined is constrained to your skull, is in fact everything that you see. Everything. So internal and external, those are artificial constructs. And you could reason that out. You can reason that out as well as discover it metaphysically. Yeah. And that's what's happening. Yeah, that's what's happening right now with the free energy principle, with the Ruliad, with in quantum mechanics. They're realizing you can't disentangle the observer from the observed, and that they're one unit. You know, they're entangled. They're one thing. And now I heard Stephen Wolf he's talking now about space atoms. I really admire and respect the guy. Nothing like that, but and this was from about maybe a year and a half ago. But he's saying that they made this big discovery that the space must be made of these little atoms. And well, what are the atoms made of? Well, we don't know. We don't know anything about them. We can't say anything about them except that they exist. Okay, how big are they? Oh, they're 10 to the minus 100. That's okay. Think about that. 10 to the minus 100th. You say, well, really? Where'd you get that number? And I don't want to tell you where that number came from because it would be obscene. Anyway, now we're at the space atoms, but it's falling apart. I mean, science is coming to the same recognition, and this is really quite wonderful to see that the non-dual understanding is the scientific understanding as well. All right, go ahead. I got excited. Go ahead.
Yeah, by reasoning, all of that makes sense to me, and it's honestly quite simple and elegant. Like I just don't see how the thing being observed can be any different than than like consciousness, big C, that's observing it. That just almost follows from the emptiness thing. The fact that nothing is made of. If that
consciousness, big C, I just want to make sure our vocabulary is correct. If big C consciousness is this world, what's small c consciousness?
This world? I wouldn't call it this world. It would be like the thing that this world shows up in. Plus this world, I guess, because this world has to be made of it. Otherwise, what else is it made of?
Okay, so then what's small c consciousness?
I guess that would be what people refer to when they say, like, I'm conscious. Well, people use this consciousness, which is like, I'm
It's not just people. If you go to and this is why I bring the point up. In The Secret of the Golden Flower, this beautiful Buddhist and Taoist meditation manual, with which only 6 pages are relevant right now to most people, unless you're a therapist or something like that. They use the word consciousness to refer to the mind.
To an individual mind. The discriminating consciousness, they say, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
The one that puts its attention on parts of this world.
Yeah, so later, if we get to the Tonala and the Nagual, we'll talk, maybe. It's pretty advanced stuff. Not appropriate too much right now. So is there another practice question before we stop?
Yeah, my question is, aside from reasoning that out, how do you approach that experientially? Like, reasoning that observers observed makes 100% sense. Experientially coming to that doesn't make as much sense.
That's what this enterprise is about. This enterprise is about removing the veil of mental constructs, the veil of ego, the veil of pride, the veil of assumptions. You know, all of the things that stand between you and the obvious. The most obvious thing in the world. And those are, I just listed 4 of them, but in these books, that's what these books are for, simply to make it, rather than just sitting and staring at a wall and doing it the slow, hard, painstaking, and not necessarily successful way. There are other ways to approach this psychologically. and to deconstruct the mind that is interfering with observing the reality that's right here. Right here. So that's the whole purpose for all these words. It's like you use the problem to get rid of the problem. And words are a problem. Any concept, any construct is a problem. But we're humans and we're here together, and so we talk about these things and hope that it's a finger pointing at the moon. It's never, the words are never the moon. The moon's never the moon. Okay, practice question.
Okay.
Before we stop.
The everything is teaching at all times. Adjust accordingly.
Who said that? Who said that?
You said that on X.
I said adjust accordingly?
Yeah, I can find it, but it's a while ago.
Wow. I surprise myself all the time. Okay.
You said,
I like it. I like it. Go ahead.
Everything is teaching at all times.
Right.
I can find it, but adjust accordingly. So
it literally is. It literally is. The universe is trying to bring you home.
Yeah, some things are quite obvious. Like some they just hit you over the head. Like I had one of those this morning. Just hit me over the head. Like, okay, that's right on point. But when I'm just like walking throughout my day, and I go to work and I work from 9 to 7 or 8 p.m. or whatever it is, and I'm doing like reading through documents, writing stuff up, and maybe talking to people every now and again about business matters.
Are you doing your very best at all times?
No.
Well,
at very best at what?
Everything. You're a warrior.
No. Well, I don't know. No.
Well, a warrior does his best. Impeccability is the hallmark of a warrior. And that's striving for impeccability. You're not going to waste any energy trying to be impeccable. Do you ever take anything personally? Do you ever take anything personally at work? Somebody says something, you take it personally. Or do you ever, you're walking on the street, you see somebody and you go, ugh, God, gross. Ugh. You judge them. Those are all teachers. All teachers. Teaching you about your own mind. They are your own mind, ultimately, but hey. All right. Anything else, sir? Anything else? I mean, seriously, before we stop?
Well, I was wondering about the do your best. Well, the warrior does their best at
everything. Why not?
Even if it's a thing, the warrior, like,
you're sweeping the floor. Do your best. Why not?
That makes sense. Do your best. But
it makes sense. Oh, good. Okay, go ahead. What is it that you think you cannot do your best at? No, being impeccable is really critical, and also it leads to a better life. And people imagine that it's going to be less fun or anything like that. No, it's the opposite. You can have happiness that comes up and down. That's up and down, but joy, permanent joy, that's the reward of a warrior.
So if I
in this war, the war against the self, the jihad, as the Muslims put it, the war against the ego. Go ahead.
If I did I guess it's a matter of balance. If I did the absolute best at a certain work thing, I might work from like 9 to midnight every night.
Oh my God! Oh my God! You're kidding. How would you ever survive that? No, I mean, obviously you got to also have a time frame, and you have more than one thing to do, right? You've got your studies,
right?
You've got all kinds. You've got social obligations, right? I presume, but so you don't be sloppy. Don't be an idiot. Is important too. All right, don't be an idiot. That's very important. Okay, sir.
Okay.
Keep the faith. Guard your mind. The AIs are getting. I mean, they've already captured a whole nation in one way or the other. And so we got to be real careful with our minds, folks, because they're enemies to our minds out there. They don't care about us or our mental well-being. I watched I wanted to see whether the Shogun thing, what there was anything to that. And I saw some ads. I was shocked. These ads, if somebody was going to try to program a population to be sick, and sick, really sick from bad, ugly stuff, they couldn't do a better job. They just inundate Americans with diseases, and we're going to prevent this disease, we're going to treat this disease. That doesn't really work, but we could, sometimes it works. So, tell you, and they just implant all these ideas in your mind. That's very, very pernicious. And if I were younger, I would, you could make a career out of simply doing the psychological studies. What happens when you suggest these things over and over and over to a population? You're going to make them sick, is what's going to happen. And that's why we used to have laws against direct-to-consumer advertising, because humans are very suggestible. We're mind machines. And what happens is that these ideas get implanted and people get sick, sicker than they need to be. From eating the food, from eating the food that they get. So, I'm sorry, I digressed. All right, so keep the faith, guard your mind. Ciao.